All right. So here with David Austin. David worked for North American Aviation in the 60s, and you said that you started when you were about 20?
I was 20 years old. I hired in July. I got married July 3rd, and I was hired July 16th. So it just worked out, you know, how things go. When you're young, you just kind of roll with it.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And
just happy to have a job. And,
right.
Yeah.
It was.
So what did you get hired to do?
They, Ron Bishop is the one that hired me. He was supervisor of that department, the X-ray department in Palmdale, California, 1962. And he asked me if I knew anything about X-ray. And I says, no. I was a farm kid.
Yeah.
But I was also pretty well built, you know, I mean, and later I found out why. Got to exercise my hay bale muscles.
Yeah, that was it. That helped.
And
you were having to move that machinery around.
Right.
The cart.
Right. And the X-ray tube itself weighed probably like 40 pounds, 35, 40 pounds. Plus you're dragging this cable. Well, the cable's, the main cable is huge, you know, and heavy. Well, we had some places.
That was a 40-foot long cable, you said, right?
Well, it was probably more 25 or 30 feet. It
Okay.
was enough to go anywhere we wanted to go.
Right.
Just get that machine under it, because this thing was on all stanchions and
Right.
supports that they were building. But then we had X-ray the tubing joints, and we X-rayed the welds. The honeycomb panels were already X-rayed at LAD, Los Angeles Division, and then they were shipped to Palmdale, and then that's where they
Were joined
would join them and weld them there.
So at what point in the what's our time frame? Because first flight of first was September 21st.
64.
Yeah, September 21st to 64. So when were you? You're obviously checking before the flight. When was that happening?
Well, we're all over that airplane. That was another interesting thing too. The other guys, if they were welders, they had a department that they stayed in. If they were electrician, they had their department. We had a roving badge because we went everywhere. We went places on that aircraft that people never saw. And that was pretty unique in itself, because we did a lot of jobs and like, I wonder what this is going to do. What's this for? But we had some places we got into were really tight. And I was really blessed, I guess would be the word. I went through the Boy Scout program, and I could tie knots, rope knots. So these people couldn't figure out how to get an X-ray shot, because it's the tubing in the front wheel well, the nose gear, and the tubing joint up there, and we got to X-ray it. Well, you can't hold it.
Right.
We've got to make a support. So I said, let's get some rope. Give me some rope. So I jerry-rigged this tube up there and tied it off, and back up and shoot.
There you go.
Because
So
when we hire in, you're a setup man.
okay.
Then after a while, you become an operator. You get the key to this console and all the dials and gauges, and you get to push the button.
So how long would you say it took between being a setup guy and an operator?
Probably 6 months, 8 months, something like that.
So were you exclusively working on the Valkyrie at that point, or were there other aircraft that had...
Strictly B-70.
Okay.
And it was B-70 before it was XB-70.
It was, absolutely. Yeah.
Sure.
So,
that's all we ever called it, was B-70.
and it was just because of the new materials and the types of welds that this was all kind of cutting edge and brand new stuff.
Exactly.
And so this was technology that was developing along with the aircraft.
We pioneered portable X-ray.
Yeah, wow.
And the welding track, that's vacuum suction cups that hold this track that they would mill, put a finish on the edge of that, and then they would mate it together, and then they would weld it. Well, we've improvised our X-ray machine to go on that skate track, and that system we took to the space program. Later, I was transferred to Seal Beach on the Saturn S2, and we improvised an X-ray cone, X-ray machine on the skate track that they used to make those welds. So a lot of this carried over to other projects.
I'm going to pause this just a second and adjust my lighting on here. There we go. Now we can see your face and everything. That's a little bit better.
one of the other things that I remember was I was tall and skinny. I was a beanpole, and we got later the wings were getting ready to be finished off, and we had something they wanted to have x-rayed inside the fuel cell. These were cells. Well, they were just big enough for me to fit in with my arms like a Superman.
Straight up.
And I had the film, and the tape wouldn't stick because of your breath, your humidity.
Oh, wow.
But they pushed me back in there, and I did that. Then they had to bring in a air tube and then a return to get that air out.
Oh, my gosh.
You push it in.
For you to breathe.
Well, to keep it dry enough so that would stick, and then they would
Okay.
have my feet and they'd drag me back
I
out.
was going to say, yeah, wow.
But I was in there one time, and I'm like, you know, I could have claustrophobia.
That would be the place to have it. That would be a bad place to have it.
I
Oh,
mean,
my
it's
gosh.
dark. You had this fluorescent tube light,
Right.
you know, and that's all you had. But then they had to get this air in. Well, they shot the air in, but it wasn't enough.
So, David, we have a job for you today. This is going to be
Oh, yeah.
a kind of special day. We're going
Well,
to
there's, you know,
need you to
that was
crawl in that fuel cell and.
innovative.
Oh my, well, that's what it was.
And back to the fuel cell, when they were about to mate this thing, they went inside and guys painted all of these weldments. We call them weldments. They're welds
Right.
with Viton. Now I don't know
I know-
what it
I know
was.
what
It's a
that is.
sealer.
Okay.
They did inside the fuel tanks and everything with that, but they were respirator masks. Well, we got around that stuff, and it was wonderful. I can still smell it today. It was
Hey.
bazooka bubblegum smell.
Oh my gosh.
It smelled like bubblegum. But it was one of those flashbacks now and
Yeah.
then. You know, you
Isn't
get
that funny?
stuff.
Wow. So, first flight September 21st.
Right.
And were you there for the rollout? Didn't you tell me
yes.
that you were there
I
for the
was-
rollout as
right,
well?
Right.
And-
We were actually building number 2, and it was going fast compared to number 1.
You learned a lot
And-
on the way about how to.
And we're working on number 2, and then we hear Al and Joe taxiing down the runway with doing the afterburner job. Well, that whole building rattled when they do that, of course. I mean,
Yeah.
we're right next to the runway. And then he would lift the nose wheel and then shut it down. And then they would, you know, get those stats, and then it was...
So incremental before the first flight, there were these taxi
they
tests.
just didn't walk in there and take off. So they had to see and test and, you know, do a number of things before they do the liftoff. But the day it came, yes, we got to see it. We were all on the sideline,
Yeah.
and it was like when it left, and I'll never forget that picture. When it took off, to me it feathered to the left a little bit because it's on quite an angle. I thought first the engines were going to scrape the runway. I mean, it looked like maybe 3 feet
Yeah. Wow.
off of that runway, and
Really nose up, high angle of attack.
and then it got up so far, and then it started to feather. And
Oh no.
I could just see
Keep
this.
going. Keep going.
yeah, go, and it apparently that was a normal thing, but it left us a little rubber kneed.
Well, I mean, you've never seen it before, so it's not normal when you know,
our
then you get used to it. But
An apprehension before that.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking to each other on top of this beast, and it's like, can you believe how much this is going to weigh when they take this off? When they fly this thing?
what was
you
it,
know,
500,000 pounds or something?
500,000 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
And we got to thinking, my buddy one time there was out of the Army, and he says, this thing weighs about like 6 tanks. And we're going to fly it.
Good luck with that, right?
Oh, man. Yeah.
So, for the rollout, where they actually brought it outside for the first
Yes.
time, were you there as well?
Yeah, oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was that like? What do you remember?
I remember being back in the crowd, and Escanti. he was-
All right. So, David, you were telling us about General Fred Ascani,
and
and this was the rollout
number one.
day. Yep. Yep.
And actually, the grandstand bleacher area was viewing him. we stepped out of the building because we were on the job.
Yeah.
And we watched the rollout really from the backside. And we knew what those stats were and all that,
Oh, yeah.
that stuff. So. But it was impressive because it just kept coming and coming and coming out of that hangar.
Well, I've seen the video of that. I mean, the sun hitting that thing for the
Right.
first time. It's just gorgeous, just gleaming and white, and again, so futuristic looking.
The impression that people had of it before, they've never seen it before. And you think it's going to be a little Delta Wing aircraft.
Yeah.
You know, that the little, like some fighter comes out or something. And this
F-86 from North American.
This thing keeps coming.
Yeah. So do you remember what you felt that day?
Oh, I felt really, really happy to see it roll.
Yeah. first the baby steps here.
We had viewed off and on, and then occasionally we had something to X-ray in the final area when they were testing the hydraulics and doing some of this stuff. And we thought, boy, it's right around the corner. They're going to fly this thing soon. Well, then the next thing we hear, they're going to put it back on the props and they're going to test these gears some more or something.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Hydraulic or something. And we're like, gosh, darn, another delay.
Thought we were so close, right?
And there was 2 or 3 of those things that we're like, oh man, this is nerve-wracking.
Yeah, though they were, again, a lot of baby steps. Well, you're talking about delays, and of course with your job and checking the welds, you must have found some areas that needed to be re-welded, reworked, right?
Oh yes, sure. They find a discrepancy, and
so who made that call? Did you have that responsibility, or you were just taking the?
In our department, I did the X-ray itself. Then it would be processed, the film's processed, and then it goes to a radiographer,
Okay.
an interpreter,
Who?
and then they have specs, the specifications as to porosity, how large, how thick. If you want to know the depth in this metal,
And all that
then
showed
we
up on
would
the
go
X-ray.
back and we would do a triangulation of X-ray, and we could determine about where it is located in this weld, and then they would go in with the mini grinder and they would grind this out and refill it.
Wow.
And same process went on the Saturn program, except it was all aluminum and not stainless. This was all, I forget the alloy now, stainless steel. I remembered it then, 2014 or something like
Yeah.
that.
Well, when it flew the first time, did you, at some point after original flight, did you have to go back and check welds again?
Oh yes.
Okay.
So
So this was a very busy job. This was
after the flight.
You were never finished, right?
After the flight was get back to work.
Yeah.
We've got number 2 here to go, and
But
we
but
went back to
with
work.
number 1 though, did you go back in and check any of those welds after number 1 flew, or was
No.
it considered passed and it was?
we did not.
Okay.
Now I think later on, after some of their stress test, mock whatever they went, that they probably had a crew at Edwards that took care of that part. I'm guessing. I don't know for sure, but they had to.
Did it come back to Palmdale often?
No, not while I was there.
Okay, so once it left,
It was Edwards.
it was everything else happened at Edwards. Okay. Did you see it? Did you see number 1 again in flight
Oh yes.
regularly?
Well, I lived between Edwards and Palmdale,
Okay.
and I saw it numerous times
Regular, yeah.
flying by.
Did you stop every time and
with
just?
the B-58, you know.
Yeah.
And growing up as a kid, I was born there, Lancaster. Well, that's 8-9 miles from Palmdale. So I'm between Edwards and Palmdale, and we got to see, we were out at the playground in grammar school watching the X-15 drop from the B-52.
Could see it from
Oh, yeah.
the ground, of course.
We're out in the playground, and look,
Now, you grew up with some test pilot families,
oh yeah.
children, and you knew some of the, and your family knew some of the pilots, right?
My family owned a restaurant between Edwards and Palmdale, main thoroughfare, and they got acquainted with Al White and his wife and kids, and Walter Spivak, the project engineer, chief engineer for the B-70. and they all became acquainted. In fact, Al and Walter invited my mother to be their guest at the rollout of number 2.
Oh my gosh.
And my dad didn't,
Just family, you know.
my
just,
dad
just
didn't care.
Yeah.
So I came from Seal Beach up, and I went with her to the rollout of number 2. And that's where I showed photos of her shaking hands with Walter and Al.
It's very cool.
But then later on, after the testing was going at Edwards, then Al and his family, at that time I think it was Jenny was his wife. He was married a few times. The wife at that time anyway, and the 2 kids would stop by my folks' place on the way from Edwards going back to Northridge. And they would have a short break there and visit, that type of thing. They kept that relationship for ever.
Goodness.
Then when Al had the crash and got hurt, laid up,
With Air Vehicle 2.
then when he passed away, then his wife at that time stopped by the folks' place and gave my dad that model, that Toppings model.
Yeah, that was Al's
That was
personal
on his-
model.
That was on his desk.
Topping company. Wow.
And she said, I don't know anything about this. I mean, you know, and thank you for taking, interest, or whatever, the kids
Oh
and
my
all.
gosh.
So
And do you have that model
I
now?
have that model on my
And this was the one that
display.
was Al White's personal
Right.
topping model of the XB-70.
Yes. And apparently the test pilots, Toppings company, made the duplication of the aircraft that those people flew, and they got a copy of that,
Yeah.
apparently. So, but I looked up the Toppings company, and that was they do that, I guess, was a common
Oh,
thing.
they're beautiful plastic models
Very nice
that were
rendition.
decals and everything
And
else.
then, of
so-
course, on the base is North American Aviation and all the nice little stuff.
My father had a F-86 model from Topping. He worked for a company that Murray Company in Michigan that did some work on the wings of the F-86F, I think, right not far from where we are right now in Columbus.
Yes. Right.
And so,
right.
you know, he got a
Sure.
little F-86 that was really cool.
Sure.
Used to play with it, and then later when I realized what a topping model was, I can't believe I ever did that. You know, 'cause they look a lot better when they've not been played with. I'll put it that way. So.
Well, this is what I'm interested in saying goodbye to number 1 today. Is I'll be 80 in 6 months, and I haven't seen him since it took off.
Wow. Well, so coming back here is a reunion of sorts.
It's a
in a big
reunion,
way.
and it's a farewell.
Yeah.
So
And you know, this has been a part of your life for 60 years.
all
so,
my life, right?
So almost 60 years.
Almost
So
57 years.
yeah, and I'll hold the video camera up here, and we'll take a look at your hat. There we are.
Now that's not accurate. Well, it is accurate, but this was what the SAC emblem was going to be.
So if it had actually gone into,
It went into the Air Force production. This would have been the, I think it's the SAC emblem, and that would be a nuclear type venture.
well, I mean, it was planning to do all those
It was on
things.
the drawing
and
board.
It's supposed to replace that old B-52, which is still flying. So.
Right,
So
and they couldn't outrun missiles. This one couldn't outrun the missiles like the SR-71 can.
they had a lot of dreams back then, and
It was
you know,
exciting.
So how far along, going back to when you were at North American Aviation, how far along was the build when you came into the picture?
I came in 1962, July, and they were just getting to where the base, the bottom part, was being built, fabricated, put together, and the brace tubing was in the hydraulic section, like going back to the engines. There was thousands of brace tubing joints that went in there, and that was wide open. There was no covering on this yet. They didn't have the top half of the fuselage in yet. That came in later. They shipped it semi. They trucked it up there and got it lined up. And you see some of the manufacturing, that comes across in one piece and then they're sending it down. But it was before that, you know.
Yeah, it wasn't all fabricated.
No.
In
No. That would have been July 62, so
Yeah.
then to 64, they got it put together. But the when we had the X-ray call that they had something finished, well, then two people working on that loved it because they knew they could take a break because nobody worked around us.
Right.
Because we clear out.
Yeah. X-ray machine coming through.
The supervisors hated us because
It stopped everything.
They've got their boss, pressure, production, get it done. Then here comes these guys and it says, clear out, take a break.
Yeah,
It
funny.
was really interesting. And then occasionally there would be production, you know.
Right.
Braise these together, get them done. Then they braise some more stuff on top of that. And then they really caught it because everything had to be done in sequence.
Right.
You have to x-ray those bottom pieces first before you put the top pieces on.
So what
Get
would
those-
happen if they did that?
Cut them out,
They had to go back and
get them out.
get
of
into
there,
where you could
and
check.
Now it's taking twice as long,
Right, of course.
a delay. Yeah. It was that kind of
goodness.
stuff that went on.
And that's if the first welds are good.
And it got,
Yeah.
this was mostly brazed tubing.
Yeah.
But if it was weld,
Oh, I see what you're
then they find an imperfection, they'd grind it out and they'd re-weld it, spot weld.
Do you remember when you started, what was the projected finish date or flyby date? Do you remember hearing anything
No.
about that? Because I had a sense, there were delays in
Yes.
construction and
Yes.
flight and everything was
Well, it
pushed
was a
back and
political
the
football.
program was
Money.
cut by Kennedy and McNamara. And
I had finished number one, working on number two, then they were running out of money. So before Congress would allocate money or whatever went on there, they pigeonholed me on third shift,
Pickup 78, 79.
a night shift, into another site down here, x-raying parts on AV3.
so,
I had a lead room. We had lead room in each place.
yes.
And then we had portables that went out. Well, I was a lead room operator, and I got probably my operating status then, but they pigeonholed me over here. And then they got some funding, so I go back for a little bit, and nope, instead of laying off, you go to work down here at this site, and you're going to be an electrician on rewiring F-100s.
Wow.
So I worked doing that for a while. Then they got funding, and now I'm back full work on number two. So,
Now, you mentioned AV3.
right.
So
Parts.
there were some very preliminary beginnings of that before that was canceled,
Yes.
right? So what were some of
And
the...
I don't know how far along the other fabrication was.
Right, because things were being done in different
but,
locations and...
we x-rayed parts that could be used on 1 and 2. But we were x-raying, they had them manufactured.
Yeah,
So, well, I did that for, I don't know, quite a while. I want to say a couple months.
really.
Everything in that process is sluggish.
Of course. Well, I mean, it's
And that
it's important to
size,
be right. And,
That's exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
so... how many people were in your department doing the x-rays, would you say?
I think we had crews of 2 doing setup and button pushers.
Right. And you said you were originally setup guy, and then you got to where you
I
were...
was original setup, then I was operator, and then later they had a problem with somewhere with the brazed tubing joints. Like they had a hydraulic pressure burst. So we went back, and I ended up being an interpreter of brazed tubing. And all of this film is on file, and they kept everything. I don't know what they do with it today, but it was everything x-rayed was kept and filed and categorized with paperwork as to who inspected it, when, and if I had a question, then I had a supervisor that would look at it, and if he had a borderline decision, he'd get a higher up
Right.
type thing, or cut it out and put melt and re-pour. Because this brazed tubing had 2 rings of silver solder, and they would push the joints together inside this coupling and then put a thermocouple over that,
Over top.
and it got 1,000 degrees or what it was, cherry red, and melt that silver solder in there, and we'd x-ray it. We'd come with the x-ray on an angle, and then do one here and one 90 degrees. Do a 90-degree shot on 2 shots to a joint.
Make sure it was all sealed.
Make sure it's on an angle so you could see these rings. If they're straight, that's all you see.
Yeah.
So you got to see like an elliptical type thing.
But you learned a lot over time in terms of interpreting and,
boy,
and what.
you bet.
Yeah, you better.
Well, I ended up, 2 of us, basically audited all of the brazed tubing joints that were x-rayed on that number 1.
Wow.
So we got a first-hand experience real quick because the other guys were interpreting welds and they didn't have just set up for brazed tubing. So they set up a booth. We had a Kodak 1,000 candle-foot power light with the iris, and we went through this stuff with a 10 power comparator, called a comparator, and it has a thousandths rule on there. I've got photos.
So you can measure.
We can measure
Look.
dimensions, whatever the specification was. And then if we had a question, then there comes another one higher up that makes the call.
Double check and back you up and all that.
Right.
Yeah.
And if it was really borderline and we could get access to it, we'd go and maybe do a re-x-ray it.
Yeah.
X-ray it again and double check. But it was fascinating.
So when did you? You said you went and worked on the Saturn II. Okay. So what time frame was that?
Number 2 hadn't flown yet. In fact, number 2 was, I want to say, a little over 3/4 complete. And they were looking around at expendable employees.
Not me.
And our department was downsizing because things were getting close to the end. So we had the option, I think 3 of us transferred to Seal Beach on the Saturn S2. And we took a lot of that knowledge that we gained there and took it with us, and it was invaluable, really.
Yeah.
And then what was really interesting was we got down there, and I have to be careful. I get wound up in some of this stuff. It was like working with some Hollywood folks, if you know what I mean. The work ethic is different from a big city person, from a farm kid in a production, and you know, this isn't a job to be milked. We're going to go to the moon.
Right.
And I'm here to tell you this company can do it. We said that thing wouldn't fly, and it flew.
And it flew.
Now, I'm not going to say this won't work, but they said, no, man, this is a gravy train.
Oh.
Yeah.
That wasn't how you were used to doing things.
I want to milk this.
Yeah.
Well, that was pretty much the mindset. Well, then pretty soon here comes a person from management from Palmdale into this area. And then here comes another and another. Pretty soon we have all the Palmdale supervisors and directors and whatever. They took this over because they were behind on this production of the Saturn. And it ended up that a comment was made in my department there, non-destructive testing, because we did fluorescent dye penetrant, we did all sorts of different testing, non-destructive, X-ray, and my forte was X-ray. But they were behind production-wise and this type of thing, and it ended up some of my co-workers, well, if you're not from Palmdale, you probably get laid off.
Wow. That's what was happening? So you were okay though.
I was okay.
Yeah.
I ended up, I was a radiographer, interpreter of the weldments, or the welds of the Saturn S2. And there was 3 shifts of us. You know, and there was 2 of us day shift, and each shift. Then I became lead man, and then I left there as an associate engineer, analyst on the Apollo,
Wow.
inspecting specifications of non-destructive testing. For future.
That's a pretty good journey for a farm boy, isn't
You
it?
bet.
Oh my gosh.
It was quite a ride.
You know, I mean, total right in the middle of all this space age,
Right.
futuristic.
Then 1970, I got laid off.
Finally, they caught up with you and pulled your number, huh?
Right. Then they kept us, a lot of us from that department went to a company called Stress Skin. They made honeycomb panels for Rolls-Royce in Santa Ana, California. So we all followed that, had employment, and commute back and forth, whatever we had to do.
So Rolls-Royce engines?
Rolls-Royce engines.
Okay.
It was cowling.
Were
for
these
their engine.
commercial
I don't know
or-
exactly. I
okay.
think it was on commercial jets.
at that point? I don't know.
And instead of having the honeycomb and 2 sheets fabricated like we did with the
Top and
B-70,
bottom.
it had a foil in between, and that would melt and bond it together. This was, it was like a, what do they call it, a spot welder? Mm-hmm. Only they had it real wide, and they could crank out these panels. And they were ribbons, and they spot welded the top and bottom, and that's how they made their honeycomb.
Wow. So your experience was really
So then
valuable.
I was visual inspector mostly
Okay.
for that operation. But then that ended up, I had enough of that, so back to the farm I went.
And that took you to where?
That took me to Central California, and I seed and grain family business.
Mm-hmm.
I did that for 10 years, and then I had an opportunity. I was not going anywhere very far, very fast with that operation. Family business, you know. And I ended up being the elected president of the California State Grange, which is the 2nd largest ag organization in California.
Oh, wonderful.
At that time had 43,000 members,
Goodness.
and I was elected every 2 years. And after 8 years of that, I just burned out. I was their VP for 2 years before, so 10-year run. But it was fun.
You never really left the farm in that
No,
sense. It
no.
stayed with you, and then you
Right.
returned to it, huh?
Right.
Wow.
So life's been exciting.
Yeah. And where do you live now?
I live in Montana, southwest Montana, and my ex-wife had children there. My kids were grown and gone, and she wanted to be closer to them. I said, well, life's an adventure, let's go.
Let's go.
So I ended up, I've been there 30 years.
Oh, wow.
It's lovely.
Yeah.
It's great scenery.
Beautiful
and
part of the
A
country.
great place to live, and laid back. If you don't have a gun rack in your old beat-up truck, an empty gun rack, a leaky muffler, and a dog, you're nowhere.
You ain't from around there, are you?
You don't belong there. You must be a
You
tourist.
must be a tourist.
You're a tourist.
Well, do you find your head still shooting up when you hear something flying overhead?
I do. Yes.
Yeah.
Because I grew up with it.
I was going to say, but you were seeing X-15s and
Right,
B-58s and B-70s flying overhead.
Yeah.
What was the
And,
first plane you remember seeing in the air?
Do
you recall?
The first one I recall is a flying wing. And that would have been
The
late-
the
I
XB-49?
don't know. But it was the strangest thing I ever saw.
You saw one fly?
Uh-huh.
No kidding.
Flew over the house. Went right over there.
Oh my gosh. Well, you
It was
grew up
going into Palmdale.
Yeah, you grew up in Lancaster, you
Oh,
said.
yeah.
So that
Yes.
was,
Well, I mean, it was every day was something.
Oh, my gosh.
F-86, F-100s,
Yeah.
whatever. Then I got to the X-ray. This would be a fun item. It was getting close to the shift change at Palmdale.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple guys that would have been qualified to do this, they commuted back and forth to LA. They lived down below, they called it, in LA. and we're in the upper desert. Well, they needed somebody in X-ray, a button pusher, to go to Edwards and X-ray a spar, wing spar on the X-15. So
Oh, wow.
Ray Thurston, a little gray-haired guy, he was the interpreter. And he and I flew in their company DC-3 to Edwards and did our job. Yep, looks okay. And flew back. And I think it was like an hour and a half overtime or something.
Right.
They paid me.
Oh, wow. But you got to land at Edwards. That to me
I
sounds pretty
landed
cool,
in
too.
Edwards in a DC-3.
In a DC-3.
Or even
Wow.
fly in a DC-3.
That's awesome. You can still do that today, but not land at Edwards. They don't,
No.
they don't let you do that. So.
No. And
Wow.
then walk up to the X-15, it's right there.
Yeah.
And then the X-ray it.
Well, they've got one underneath the Valkyrie that we'll see here in a little bit today, so
Might be the one I X-rayed.
we'll find out. That would be neat to see.
I don't know which one it was, but my dad, by the way, in the 40s worked on the sled track for the X-15.
Really? The rocket sled track.
Right.
Yeah.
They put a dummy in that sled to see what G's it would take
No comment.
before they flew that.
Oh my gosh. So I'm not sure. There's a museum somewhere that has that. They have that sled car. That's
Okay.
been
Well, I'm
it's
sure.
been restored and it's on display. I don't know if it's here or
Okay.
not, but that would be neat to see. So your dad worked on the track.
He did. He helped. Yes, part-time.
Yeah. It was wide open
You
for
never
everybody
know.
out in that part of California at that
Oh,
time.
yeah. Sure. You just never know where life goes. Well, I
It's
was
taken you some great places, though.
I took a one-year art class in high school, my senior year, and they had a poster contest. And what did I do? You take the path of least, what is it?
Resistance.
The line of least resistance. I made a poster of the Saturn V in 1961.
We forget sometimes that obviously, they'd release that. That was the plan. We knew that was
I saw
coming.
a picture of that, so I made a
You
poster.
did a poster
and
of
it was 3 foot.
Yeah.
I have a big poster board and pen and ink, and drew
Yeah.
this thing, and got an honorable mention or something, and ended up working on it.
I ended up working on it. Who
And
knew?
I'm at the Cape. They shipped me portable X-ray, the test stand in Mississippi. They would build it in
Yeah.
Seal Beach, barge it around and up the Pearl River to Mississippi, test fire, and then send it back to the Cape and then assemble it. So I got to go to the Cape several times. I've been to Mississippi numerous times.
And that was with North American Aviation,
North
of course.
American, then they merged with Rockwell.
Right.
And when they did that, we're all like, yay, maybe they'll figure out the brakes on that B-70. Learn how to make, Rockwell invented the disc brake.
Oh, so
So maybe
they'll fix it.
Fix those brakes from locking up.
oh well.
Those wheels.
One can dream.
So then after that it went Rockwell, North American Rockwell. And then Rockwell International and whatever it is.
Lost the North American name. Yeah.
Because when I first got to Seal Beach, it was a Space and Information Systems Division, S&ID.
Space.
North American Aviation, S&ID. Then they merged with Rockwell, North American Rockwell.
We'll go back to what you said about NASA. When you were there, or when you went to Mississippi, did you actually see a test firing?
No.
So you didn't see that?
We would go
But-
right after they do that, and we would fluorescent penetrate inspect the inside of all the welds.
Yeah. Well, they kind of been through a little bit at that point, so it was good to make sure they held up, right?
Yeah.
Oh man.
We'll see if the contraction, liquid hydrogen, the heat, the expansion and contraction on aluminum. We're talking some thin aluminum on the walls of these things, but the weld lands, the weldment itself was, could be 3/8 of an inch thick,
Wow. Okay.
that type of thing. And we would fluorescent penetrate and inspect,
On here.
let you edit.
Yeah. Let's go back. You were saying that when you were down in Mississippi after test firing, you would be checking.
Then they would take it back out of the stand and put it on the transport, and the transport would rotate it.
Okay, so you could X-ray it.
We're inside, we would penetrate, inspect the welds, and then rotate, and they could rotate this thing like I don't know, several feet, and then we would do some more. And we'd have 4 or 5 guys, 4 or 5 of us inside doing that. Well, I was lead man at that time, so I had the crew that went back and forth. And where was I going with? Oh, if we found a flaw, maybe a suspect crack, fissure, then we would X-ray that area. And a lot of times it was just superficial.
So were you doing that on the spot? You had the equipment to do it right there outside at the test stand?
They shipped our X-ray machines and everything down there.
Wow.
Sure.
Okay.
On the 727.
Yeah. Goodness gracious.
It was quite exciting.
Yeah. And then you did some work at the Cape, you said, as well, for
Right.
North American?
Right. They had would develop maybe a problem. Well, they sometimes develop a problem, but then sometimes I found a problem for them. And that I didn't do it on purpose.
Right.
I was
That was your job,
I
though.
was reading a weldment in Seal Beach of something near one of the welds that's on the valves. These valves produce 1,200 gallons a second of the fuel coming out of this thing to supply the engine. And around on the weld, I saw a flaw. Well, apparently thick enough they didn't, I don't know if they didn't X-ray them or what, but it was done in Louisiana.
Goodness.
And
The weld or the
weld.
the X-ray? Okay,
And
the
I
weld
found
was
this
done.
flaw, so now we have to go back and X-ray all of these. That
If it's on one, that could be on
in
others.
existence.
Yeah.
Yes. We had that a number of times, where we'd find something and then they'd ship us to go check the rest of it.
That was your job to do that. So
Right.
I mean, if you were finding a flaw, then you know it
Right.
probably felt pretty good actually, because
It was.
you know.
And then another time we did an X-ray job and interpreting the film, and there's something up, looking at the weld, and there's something up here, it looks like a nut, hexagon nut. And we're like, wait a minute.
What's that doing
So
there?
the skirt came here, and then you have the dome, the bulkhead would come to inside here. Well, this is going to expand and contract,
Right.
And it just let that nut work a little further down each time.
Oh yeah.
So it ended up, we did a debris shot on all of them that were in line, in existence. Well, back to the Cape, back to everywhere. And we put 2 strips of 12-inch Kodak film, 70 millimeter. That's the type M, is not 70 millimeter. It's 1 foot. I don't know what millimeter, but it's a foot wide. 2 of those around this skirt, and then we would do a 360 X-ray, clear the building.
Because that energy's going everywhere. at
We're
that
not
point,
talking about clearing feet. We're talking about evacuate the whole building.
Goodness.
Because we used
Is that an automated?
150 kilovolt.
Is that an automated X-ray that you were?
No,
Or so you're operating it?
See, the 150 machines, we had in lead room. Well, they have a lead cover over the anode. Well, then it bombards, the X-ray comes out controlled, you know. Well, if you take this cover off, it does a 360.
Okay.
So it's just a piece of glass out there, tungsten target. So we took that off and then lower it by crane down the center of the bulkhead and the film on the outside, and then clear the building and then blast it for 20
Just
minutes.
does its thing.
And then we'd process that film, forget 1,200 inches, I forget the exact pi times diameter.
Right.
So it's 30 feet wide, 30 feet diameter.
Goodness.
So we went through a
A lot of film, yeah.
miles.
You'd have to.
But that was kind of exciting, and you know, we discovered that problem. Well, then they came up with a membrane seal. So where the skirt is and this bulkhead met, they put a plastic with a sealant that before they would fire, they would pressurize like argon or something that would be inert and not let it get frost. Frost was building up in this area too because of the heat and the cold.
It's a lot of cutting edge
You
stuff.
don't think about that. I mean, you never knew it.
There it was.
And that's just the tip of stuff.
But there was a lot of innovation. There was a whole lot of and problem solving, and you know, the thing about the Valkyrie that it's always represented to me is just that, you know, that cutting edge. That what could we do if, you know, and so what does it take to do something? And I mean, you know, as I've read about it, learned about it, and you know, you realize it was obsolete before it flew, but they still, you know, pushed through and did the test program,
And they learned a number of things with that. At that time, they were looking at building SST, and Concorde and some of these. Boeing was interested in some of these stats. Of course, a lot of them, I'm sure, that North American says we've got it, it's ours, and you know,
competitor. We're gonna.
we're not going to give it to you. You know, this type of thing. Yeah, I don't know what all goes on there, but there's a lot of those things that they learned. Sonic boom, a number of things that they did.
Well, you heard, speaking of sonic booms, you heard Valkyrie sonic booms, I would assume, right? Actually, you may not have, because they wouldn't have been flying at speed over
us,
Lancaster,
it was so
really.
far away.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So they
I
wouldn't.
mean, they made a turn. They took in Nevada, Arizona, and Cucamonga. Just a turn.
Yeah. So I guess actually you wouldn't have heard
I don't
that
think
overhead.
so. No. And if we did, it was another sonic boom. It's no big
It was
deal.
not an unusual thing.
No, every day is something.
Well, where I grew up, and you were just in Muskegon yesterday,
Right.
the B-58s were
Right.
in at Peru at Grissom.
Okay.
At the time, it wasn't Grissom. I should remember the name of the Air Force base there.
Thing it goes.
Yeah, it is. But there were B-58s there, and so in the early '60s, when I lived in Muskegon, there were B-58s that were flying over Lake Michigan and doing, you know, some speed tests and calibration. I guess they were maybe responding to potential threats coming across the northern border. But we heard sonic booms. I remember that as a really young kid, but I didn't know what it was. I remember later my dad said, "Oh, those are B-58s that were you know, coming up out of Indiana."
I was in the classroom in the east side of Lancaster on the desert, and we would be in class, and the windows would rattle in that schoolhouse. I mean, the whole building would rattle with some of those sonic booms. But that was like, I think, 4th or 5th grade. Jaeger broke sound barrier in the X1.
Yeah.
And that, I recall the event, but I didn't realize the gravity of it until later, you know, later in life.
Right.
But now it could have been, some of those could be the X1 that we saw.
Could very.
The vapor trail.
Yeah, could very well have been. So, you know, the story of the Valkyrie, of course, is a tragic one as well. And in June of '66, there was the mid-air collision. And I don't remember what day of the week that was when that happened, but I think it was a weekday. Do you remember where you were when you heard about that accident?
We were Seal Beach, and we were...
So you were working on Saturn at that point?
We were working on Saturn S2, and I forget the exact job, but we were X-raying bulkhead welds, and I was interpreter at that time, and then came out on the floor, and one of the guys from Palmdale, "Did you hear the news?" So,
Yeah. It was early in the morning, I think, before 9, maybe.
When we got it, the information, it was afternoon.
Yeah.
But it was like, oh no, you know, number 2.
That was the better of the two, of course.
Oh gosh, it was, I want to say, 3 times better.
Yeah.
Structurally, everything was sound. They did, of course, the dihedral.
Yeah, the wing dihedral.
Right. And but the welds and the tubing and everything went together almost like it's supposed to. You know, I remember that. And we thought, boy, this is going to be,
This is the hot rod. This
going
is
to be a
the
killer. Yeah, it's be goody. Yeah.
wow.
Where the first one was a test for all of us.
Everything was all brand new. Yeah.
And you know, some flaws they didn't expect. You know, but you know, it's going to be. It has to be. You can't just do something the first time and it's perfect. That's why it's a test. And I'm just thankful that they had the technology to get all of the documentation they did get. I go on this YouTube and I can't get up. I stay there and watch this
Yeah.
stuff. And I remember that coming in. And then they brought the engines in and they're gonna, how do they get them up there? I was just like a kid, you know. How are they gonna do that? Well, then I saw it.
Lift
The
that.
engines in, and then I'm 7 or 8 miles away with my young family, and if you guys are around tonight, they're going to static fire the engines. And it was just getting dark, and I was outside, and I forgot about that, but I heard a noise. And I looked off over there and I saw this big cloud of dust. I actually saw the dust,
All the dust from the.
when they fired this up before they were going to taxi. I mean, they were going to be doing taxi runs, but they had to first do the full. They're going to do the full static.
We've seen pictures of shots where it's on the ground and in full afterburner where they're doing that test. So that's what you saw.
Yes.
Wow, and heard.
Oh yeah, I heard it.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's 7 or 8 miles away. But the weather, the wind,
Oh yeah,
it's all just right. And of course out there,
pretty unforgettable.
you know,
Yeah.
never forget it.
Sense of pride.
You bet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did that. I built that. I worked at that. That's
Oh,
my
yeah.
that's my plane.
Well, that's the way I am today. That's
Yeah.
why I kind of get.
Yeah,
And then knowing the friends, you know,
yeah.
family friends.
I mean, that was important and early part of your work career, professional career, and
I learned so much from that. You know, I learned mathematics in that, segued to other things. You know, I get into space program, and they say, "Do you know anything about this or that?" And I say, "No." Wonderful. Come on down. We need you. You know,
Yeah.
we want to train you the way we want to train you, not bringing.
we don't have to unlearn those bad habits.
We don't want you to come from Lockheed and tell us what you did there. We want you to do it the way we want.
Yeah.
So we were all, mindset was North American all the way. So that made a difference to them.
When's the last time that you visited any of the work locations?
I
Did
haven't.
you ever go back to any of those
No.
places after you left? Yeah.
No.
It was just,
Some of the Seal Beach is gone.
yeah.
Plant 42 is still there, but that's done. They have built many other things
Right.
through that, and now apparently the new replacement for the B-2 is in progress. I forget what it's another stealth Raider.
Is it B-21 or something?
I
Is
think
that what
so.
it's called?
Like that.
I think so.
I think it's a Raider, and of course it's going to be faster and sharper and whatever.
All the things.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
And that was something else. I don't know. Just keep asking questions.
Yeah.
Seal Beach, country kids, and they say we're going to be dealing with isotopes, guys. They want us to start looking at isotopes and X-ray and this stuff because the machinery is the reason. So we go to class in this company school, and we're going to teach you bonehead trig equations and powers of 10 from a bonehead viewpoint. And here we are sitting around each other and like, what are they talking about? What is powers of 10 and this stuff? So we got this little booklet, and I still have the booklet. It's a flip chart thing. It's Bonehead 101 for figuring powers of 10.
That's it.
So we didn't have calculators. They weren't invented yet. So we did everything pencil. And I've got 2 pages of powers of 10 on the piece of
Figured out, so you, yeah.
because we had to figure half value of life of the source.
Of the isotope.
Right.
Yeah.
And that, and then distance and all this stuff. Oh, back to the X-ray cones that we used. We had various sizes. You'd have a 9-inch cone, or you might have a 12. So everything with X-ray is distance and thickness. That's it. And there's an equation for that. It's called the inverse square law, and that's a formula that you can figure some of this type of thing: focal point, focal distance, and time. And a lot of our X-rays, majority of them were like a minute and a half, minute and 20 minutes, or 20 seconds, or something like that. So that's how we determine the thickness and to the exposure. And we liked the Type M film because it was the best quality. Faster film, AA film, is grainy. But the Type M is primarily what we used all throughout both programs because it was clarity, it was pretty sharp.
Pickup number 80.
Then it had a Type M that's even more refined and get better quality.
Right.
We did the, what did I say? We had Type M.
Yes.
But there was a AA that was real fast, Type M, and then there was another one after that. Slower yet.
So, in the time that you were doing X-rays, so that technology was still evolving. So some of the equipment that you started with may have changed over time. In the few years that you were doing that,
No,
or was it all pretty much
everything
okay.
same,
right.
all the way.
You said Norelco made
We
the
used
cart.
Norelco on the portable. It was like a tool chest, one of the rollaways, about that size. And we could roll it around. It had a tongue on it and 4 pneumatic tires. I mean, it's heavy.
Yeah.
And then it had, of course, the cable and the X-ray tube. Then the lead room was 150 kilovolt and not portable. It was all on a apparatus like a dental chair type thing,
Oh, right.
only a little bit stronger.
I hope so.
And those were Seiferts, a Seifert machine.
I'm going to pause this here. All right, so you were saying that is a Seifert machine?
It was a Seifert, I think it's made in Germany.
That was the name of the manufacturer, Seifert?
Right.
Okay.
And the other was Norelco. And I tried to Google Norelco X-ray machine, and I could not find anything.
Well, we'll hope some folks will find some more information. It'd be neat to see if there's any of those machines still around somewhere on display or in a museum.
I'm sure.
Yeah. People will look at that and say, my gosh, look at that thing.
It would be fascinating now to see the different cones that we used and, how...
I hope all that still exists. We'll ask folks to see if they can find out if there's any of that still
It would
around.
be so interesting to see the display of all of the different sizes of these cones.
Yeah.
They're very basic. You could take your license plate and make a 10 shape and then line the inside with the thin lead sheet and solder it, weld it together, fuse it together. And then we would have that over a weld, and then we took lead vinyl and went around the sides of that with lead vinyl. And then the back side had a sheet lead so it wouldn't go out.
Did you know much about the properties of X-rays when you started working there, or was that all?
Not a bit.
Yeah. So.
No.
Oh, by the way, you got to be careful here. You need to
They say don't be afraid of it, just respect it.
just be respectful, man.
And we all had the Retkin meters. I mean, that was a standard issue. And
So you had a limit as to how much exposure you could have, of course.
We would go MR, and all we had was a film badge in Palmdale. I got to the space program, we got the film badge and the dosimeter. That's a daily reading if you get something. Well, I got something one time by accident. I got 60R. Got age, and it was on my feet, and I was standing on this area. They made a mistake somewhere down outside. And then I had blood tests and this type of thing. they would test to see if there's any change in my white cells.
Right. So, oops, don't do that again.
But your age is involved in that a lot, you know.
Right.
You're young, and it wasn't a vital organ or something. It was a lower extremity, so it must be fine. I've lived this long.
You've done all right, haven't you? Feet still work, so
I can
that's
still
good.
walk.
That's good. Well, why don't we go down and take a look at your old bird, your old friend there?
Be delighted.
Yeah. I'll pause this here and we'll pick it up in a few moments.
You have volume on there?
I do.
We got to work X-ray. They're going to sit in this thing, and it's so small. We X-rayed in the fuel tank right behind the cockpit, and it's just before they put the capsules in for the pilots, and then it became restricted. No one could even look in that. The windows were covered, and it was blocked off.
Wow.
So they had some instrumentation in there that was not to be shown. And of course, we could never take cameras to work.
No. You'd have some great shots if you did.
Oh boy.
Now, you were telling me that part of your job, you went into the intakes, right?
I stood up. I was 6'1", and I could stand up, walk down about 4 feet with my arms out. And that's the size of those intakes. And of course, they narrow down as they go back.
And checking welds in there as well.
Right. Space program. This is mind over matter. If it doesn't mind, it doesn't matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter. Mind over matter.
I thought your line was going to be, I could tell you, but I don't have to tell you.
Then we just carry on with what we're going to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Pass it off. In other words, we're not going to tell you.
Yeah.
But this was classified. It wasn't secret. Some of the other works got clearance.
Yeah.
This is confidential.
Kind of hard to keep it under wraps, though, once it got out.
Oh boy. I mean, what's the line on that? What I thought a confidential would be, I'm not to be interviewed by a reporter. We can talk to my supervisor about that.
Yeah, yeah. What's that mean exactly?
Exactly.
So, David, this is the first time you've seen the Valkyrie, you were saying, in 57 years.
Right. I worked on this at 20 years old in 1962.
You were X-raying welds.
We X-rayed welds and we X-rayed the raised tubing joints, which numbers thousands.
A lot of brand new technology and materials, so it was very, very important, of course, for something this sophisticated.
And this is all welded, stainless steel. That's why it's extremely heavy, because it's honeycomb core sheet on the outside to dissipate the heat. It gets 600 and some degrees.
Now, you mentioned part of your job, you actually walked into the intake there.
I can stand up and walk in the intake on each side with my arms out. That's how big it is. I was 6'1", I think, at that time.
It's a good thing there's not a ladder handy, or I might help you back up in there.
I may have ducked a little bit, but every now and then there'd be a guy in there eating his lunch then. Because we had airflow pass through there.
Yeah.
And it was pretty good, pretty interesting.
Well, why don't we walk around a little bit, and I know you're going to take some pictures, but if you want to share any thoughts or memories or things that you remember from
Well, I
those.
remember walking on the top of the thing today.
And again, that was part of your X-raying responsibilities and duties to make sure everything. Yeah, tell us what you remember about the Bombay, because we know when this plane was flying and doing its test regime, they had a lot of measuring equipment and.
That's where they put all the instrument package was raised and lowered in this. But it was, it could be outfitted with other things besides test equipment. One of these doors would slide back, I think, and it would expose the entire bomb bay. And we had I think we had just a couple jobs on that. It's mostly electrical wiring that went in there. It's mostly the electrical wiring that went in that bomb bay. Very little raised tubing and that type of thing that we go in there for. We're all around underneath here, and of course we inspect everything, check it out. And all of the welds, they were welded in there. We had to X-ray those welds wherever we required. But everything was X-rayed. All of the honeycomb panels were X-rayed at Los Angeles Division, shipped to Palmdale, and then they get to Palmdale and they would butt them together and weld those together, and that's what we got.
Okay. Coming around to the landing gear, which was very convoluted and complicated in terms of how it swung and lifted, and
It's very interesting. They would test this, had it propped up, and it's amazing that this even worked, let alone the material. The struts are H11 steel, which at that time was the hardest steel that they made. And we didn't have to X-ray, it was forged. The rest of this plane is stainless steel and titanium. This was H11 steel, they called it.
it had to be plenty strong to support something this big.
500,000 pounds.
Yeah. And you mentioned something earlier when we were talking about the braking system.
Yes. When North American merged with Rockwell, we thought, oh boy, we've got a company that's going to fix these wheels from locking up.
We've all seen pictures and video of some issues with the landing gear upon landing.
And of course, one landing they made, the wheels were vertical.
The tiptoe landing, yeah.
Landed down, the tiptoe, landed on two wheels.
These tires were filled with nitrogen.
And B.F. Goodrich had to come up with this type of design to withstand 380, 360 degrees, and they're impregnated with aluminum. And I found that article on that. This is a series of discs.
The way this thing would lift a little bit, then rotate, and then fold up was really complicated.
Tilt down, rotate this way, and fold up sideways right up in there.
Yeah, that's the door right
This
there.
door would open, and this goes sideways, and goes up into there.
Nothing simple.
It was a space saver, and there's the back of the ball bay door here, so it would slide back.
So we're here with David Austin, who worked at North American Aviation back in the 60s. Fresh from the farm to working X-ray systems, checking welds on the XB-70, which was ahead of its time then. and continues to look that way. David was telling me earlier that he actually did work on both Air Vehicle 1 and 2, and also did some checking on some of the early construction of what would have been the third Valkyrie. Production stopped pretty early, but that there were some parts that were fabricated, and he did check the welds on some of those early parts that were put together for the Valkyrie. We're looking here at the power source for the Valkyrie, the YJ93 turbojet, massive engine, and we'll take a look. 30,000 pounds of thrust each. Back here in the rear of the Valkyrie, where you can see these monsters. Just a tremendous source of power here. That strut there that would hold the tail in place, keep it from flapping. I don't know if you can tell, number 4 is a little bit wide open, a little bit more wider. I've understood that was the last one to be shut down.
Correct.
So even from this angle, it's pretty impressive looking.
A little over 4,000 pounds apiece.
And so changing an engine was probably a dicey thing. You said you saw, what did they have? Did they have a lift, a hydraulic lift that they used?
At one time, they had like a cable pulley system up here. They would just lower it down, maybe pull it. I don't know. I remember a cable, but it makes more sense to have a hydraulic jack type scissor. But they have to bring it up here, and then they have to push it, take it in.
David, was there a piece that above the engines here? Was there something that was attached there that's not here?
Well, there might have been a fairing or something like that, but I don't think so.
Yeah,
I think this would have been like that to dissipate heat.
could be. Yeah,
Because this is going to cook hotcakes on top of that sheet.
yeah. Very well may be.
And they got the full afterburner on that. These things are going to get cherry. And probably that platform on top of that, I don't know. No, there wasn't anything else on that I remember.
Okay. Let's go around a little bit up towards the nose and see. I think we go around, it looks like the long way to the right, but let's see from this side.
It might be a different angle.
Okay, we're still here at the National Museum of the United States Air Force with David Austin. David, who worked at North American Aviation back in the 60s and was responsible for x-raying the welds and helping to certify the Valkyrie for flight. Reunited with an old friend after 57 years. What do you think? How's she holding up?
It's fine. And these little stress seams on here are immaterial. I know what's inside it. It's stainless steel structure.
Yep.
And everything on this is welded. Except for a piece of the nose cone was riveted titanium.
Riveted titanium. Okay. So you've been up on top of this thing, you've been inside of it, been under it.
Well, I made a living on this job for 2.5 years, 3 years. Because it was early 1965, I was transferred to Seal Beach, California. And number 2 was well underway and pretty much finished with quality control folks. That was my department, was in quality control.
You reflect back on that 57 years and, you know, the fact that it's still around, it still is here. It's a highlight of the museum. They feature it in so many things. And I know you mentioned the pride you felt when you saw it roll out.
I'm just really happy I could see this again. I'm approaching 80 and I don't think I'll be able to have the timing as ripe as it is to say farewell, old buddy. And it did what it was designed to do, and that's the main thing.
It certainly did, and it did it with incredible amount of power and style and just badass design, you know? I mean, how else do you say it? You think about somebody on the drawing board, a team of architects, engineers on the drawing board in the late 50s, early 60s, and just thinking, hey, what could we do if? And they,
Slide rules.
yeah, exactly.
All slide rules.
And here we are. Well done. And to you, a job well done.
Well, thank you, but I was just a little spoke in the wheel.
Well, there's a whole lot of spokes in that wheel, and we're grateful to everybody that was a part of this. Hey, Graham. David Graham Simons has said hi. He's watching. So, Graham, you and I stood here not too long ago, a few years ago, and we were looking for some of your books in the gift shop here. David, as you may have heard, and you know in the past, you know, he worked on the Valkyrie, so we're here checking it out again in person. Just thrilled to be here. It's been 57 years since he's seen it, so, and reuniting with an old friend, of course.
I've got a lot of blood and sweat in some of those bays.
Yeah.
In the upper desert of Mojave Desert, you think it doesn't get hot.
2018, yeah, Graham, that was it for the Memphis Belle. Something else. So we're, let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. Now, it doesn't let me do that, but the pilots that are listed here on the on this side of the intake splitter, Al White. And what was your memories of Al? He's a family friend.
Al and his family would stop at my folks' place after a flight test at Edwards, and they would stop at my folks' place halfway between Edwards and Northridge, where they lived, and do a pit stop and a little visit. And if I were Al, he would know my dad had a bottle in the freezer and maybe have a short nip.
That would be good.
After some of these landings that they made, I would definitely be interested in that.
That was a good use of their time, wasn't it?
Let them wind down. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Thank you. Sorry.
So Al White would come by and visit Colonel Joe Cotton. Did you ever have a chance to see him or speak with him?
No, I didn't.
It wasn't really what, you know, as part of the job it wouldn't have happened, but just, you know, you were living in Lancaster at the time, or you grew up there, so.
We had a family restaurant between Edwards and Palmdale, and Al and Walter Spivak became very acquainted with my folks. And I may have served hamburgers. I had the lunch duty on the weekends, and it's very possible I served a lot of these guys sandwich or something as they came through.
Could very well have happened. So the other pilots that flew were Fitz Fulton, Van Shepard, Carl Cross, Don Malik, and Ted Sturmthal. And of course, of those 7, Don Malik is still with us. And Don, if you see this, we sure are hoping you're doing well. We wish you well. And good to see a plane that you famously flew, and it's still here. And visitors are just walking around, looking up, mouths agape under their masks, I guess. It's still a highlight and popular feature of the museum here. You were talking about the nose, and that it was actually not it was riveted. It was not welded.
Right, it's titanium. The nose cone was titanium, and at that time they had no technology to weld it. So that piece is all riveted. Everything else is welded and brazed tubing. Everything is stainless steel.
It sure is.
Tubing and everything.
All right, well, we're going to take some more pictures, and if y'all have any questions for David, you can go ahead and just put those underneath this video, and we'll get to them. Graham, I can't wait to see your new book on the Valkyrie. I know you were able to procure some fresh pictures that haven't been shared before, and you have judiciously, hopefully, kept them off the internet so they don't get spread out before we get to see them in your book. We sure appreciate all that you have to say about this incredible and wonderful plane and all you've added to the knowledge and discussion about the features of this plane. So, but we'll be back after a little bit, perhaps. But we'll answer any questions that you guys might have. All right, Dave, signing off here for a while. You bet.